Can you hear me?
I can. How's it going?
Oh, it's going great. It's going great. I apologize now for anything you might hear about my dogs barking because I have my patio is open right now.
About your what?
Dogs barking. I
Oh,
have crazy dogs.
oh, you're fine. You're fine. This debate should be titled like Joseph and Terrence talk about physical evolution while Joseph does laundry because that's definitely what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. So, and I'll just tell you where I'm coming from on my side. So I've did probably about 10 different debates on evolution and creationism and intelligent design. And the reason why I ask you all those questions is because every time that I debate someone that's say an evolutionist, they come with kind of a different aspect. And so it's kind of hard for me uh to frame my rebuttals if I don't know exactly where you're coming from. So even in this one right now, I'm not completely sure where you're going to come from. So I think there may be this debate and then a debate part two where I actually can focus specifically on what you're saying.
Sure. And yeah, this is more like a conversation than a
Yeah.
debate. There's no competition here.
So yeah,
Uh,
so I really don't even have notes really. I really want to hear what
yeah,
you're saying.
yeah, of course. So first thing is, I I got asked this earlier too on Facebook about because I have 4 or 5 people who want to talk evolution. The first thing is that it's evolution is not incompatible with theistic or any religious belief.
Agreed.
There are a good example of this would be William Lane Craig, who's a very famous apologist, Christian apologist, and he believes that theistic evolution is a thing. Now, my concern in this debate is not so much about whether or not theism is true, religion, theology are not at all what I'm attempting to discuss, but rather just based on the scientific information available to us, evolution is a reasonable explanation of our origins. And of course, also precluding discussions of abiogenesis. I think I'm saying that right. Because
Yeah.
God knows if I am. Yeah, because that's, again, a unique discussion. So, I mean, obviously I could speak to the wealth of scientific evidence for evolution. I mean, it's true that almost every major scientist ever believes in it. You'll make a headline if you don't, and you work in science. And yeah, so I think it's kind of it's less of an issue like if we had a question like how badly will obesity affect third world countries over the next decade? You know, there's scientists on either end of the spectrum that can have disagreement over this, but evolution is something that it looks like the entire scientific community has gotten on board with and is like, yeah, no, this is a thing. And then there's some stragglers out who disagree. So if you want to go ahead and start by explaining what your objections are to evolution, I'm happy to answer questions about it or discuss that with you.
Okay. So all right. So and I know you'll understand this, but there'll be people like the Bronsons or somebody else who clearly like hates everything that I say completely. And I just want to say that I anybody who's watching this, listen to what I'm saying and don't try to put words in my mouth. Okay.
Listen to it.
So all right. So in dealing with evolution, okay. So the way I see it is this is that at a point Darwin came up with his theory of evolution and how it went. And that was before there was really a science of genetics. There was really a time before a whole lot of the science, the leeway we've made in science was even there. So it's kind of like you can also say that at one point everybody thought the world was flat, but then later on other science came on that proved that the earth was not flat. Well, some people still say the earth is still flat, but in the same thing with Darwinian evolution, yes, he did say something back then, but there has been science and there has been some things that show that there are holes inside of the evolutionary theory or whatever. And so I always like when, especially in the title of this debate, which is evolution accurately explains our origins, because accurately is to me, and I could be completely wrong. Accurately means uh, relatively speaking, about 100% is able to explain. And then there's the word origins. And as we were talking about abiogenesis, and maybe I said it wrong, is that origins basically meaning where we're coming from. Is like, man, every time I get into a debate with somebody and I start talking where we came from, it's like, no, evolution doesn't deal with that. It deals with basically everything after the first creation. So, and just with evolution. So, the theory, now I have to kind of narrow this down a little bit. The way I understand it, and correct me if you have a differing view, is that basically the theory that at some point there was one single-celled organism, and from that single-celled organism, that everything evolved and evolved and evolved and evolved, and we would call that in the kind of Christian side, we would call that, you know, macroevolution versus microevolution. And macroevolution being that there was one single cell organism, and then like this awesome tree, and all these things sprouted from that. Well, just to let you know where I come from, I'm more of a person that believes in intelligent design. And so I believe that there may be some things that evolutionists can say, yes, this shows evolution, but more accurately than evolution, intelligent design kind of fills everything in with less holes. The only hole that would exist in intelligent design is who is the designer. Uh, so there's certain things like let's see. I don't even know where to start. So if you start with biochemistry, and one of the notes I have for biochemistry is random processes cannot produce cellular complexity. And so biochemistry says unguided and random processes cannot produce cellular complexity. And our cells contain incredible complexity, like miniature factories, you know, kind of how cells work and everything. And Darwinian evolution struggles to build this type of integrated complexity. And it's certain things that evolution just can't really, it's kind of, whether it be the Precambrian explosion, the fact that everywhere where there are single-celled organisms in the Earth strata, there's also multi-celled organisms also that exist in that same level. So it's kind of, how can you say it evolved from this, evolved into this, when everything actually is there at the same, present at the same time? I think I'm talking too much. I'll let you go. I know you're trying to fold clothes.
Oh no, I like multitasking. Good for discussion. Okay, so the first thing is in intelligent design as a religious belief doesn't directly compete with evolution, and part of the reason is that the inference is that if we don't have some sort of naturalistic explanation for something, then we'll infer that God created it. And I'm not saying that that's impossible. Like I said, theistic beliefs aren't mutually exclusive from opinions of evolution. But the first thing to establish is that it's not a scientific explanation just to say, well, we don't have a scientific explanation, so it must be God that did it. I mean, kind of a reference to the God of the gaps argument. We could infinitely say, well, a ball isn't actually dropping with gravity; it's just God pushing it down. That's not really going to be helpful. So what we should focus on is, well, like what you're saying, like the Precambrian explosion, the scientific data available. What are the holes within evolution? Because natural design doesn't actually compete with evolution. It's just a claim that because we don't have information about how this could have happened naturally, that it must be God. Now, that's actually technically a different claim from that it could not have happened naturally. And if that's the claim that people want to go for, then that's fair game to discuss. But yeah, so the Precambrian explosion, I'm not extremely familiar with. Most of my study of evolution has been like the past 5 million years of human development. But yeah, within the, I'll probably get back to you on the Precambrian explosion just for that example. But to illustrate a basic case for evolution, the thing that's so remarkable about all human life is the incredible similarity that we share. I mean, we share 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees, with rudimentary primates, we share, I won't get into all the estimates, but our DNA is incredibly similar to what I believe are our ancestral relatives. And it feels strange to say that there's no connection between the two, especially when the fossil record has really started validating this. A lot of people used to say, like, especially back in the 60s, before archaeologists had really done a ton of research, they would say things like, well, there's no continuity between species because we see all of these, we don't see the missing links between species, for example. And yet now when you jump forward to 2017, we have, tens of thousands of illustrations of missing links, not just between humans, but also between other species like birds and fish, et cetera. One of the most notable examples was in 2013, National Geographic was excavating, I believe, in Northern Africa. I can't remember. We went over this in a class, but they discovered a new species of ancient human beings known as Homo naledi. And Homo naledi is characterized by a lot of the features we would expect to see in these transition fossils. There's seven main, there's 6 or 7 main features that we associate in a difference between primates and Homo sapiens, or us, or modern Homo sapiens, I should say. The big transition between primates and human beings is bipedalism, namely the fact that we walk on 2 legs and they're quadrupedal, so they walk on 4 legs. And that transition is actually what separates us from our ancestral primates. We can see changes, for example, in the pre-Australopithecines, which are they are technically a primate, but they would satisfy the missing link request that many people have. For example, in a quadrupedal primate, like let's take a gorilla, for example, the foramen magnum, which is the hole in the skull where the spinal cord will connect up to your brain, is going to be in the back of their head for a quadrupedal because they're walking on all 4s. They're like this. Their back connects to the back of their head. And so does their spine. So you're going to see the foramen magnum in the skull right there. Now, as you move along the chain, you start looking at the pre-Australopithecines, you're going to see some similar features to classic primates. Like you'll have a really prognathic face, meaning that it's pushed out instead of orthognathic, instead of being flat. You'll see really robust, really large zygomatic arches and mandibles, like your cheekbones and your jaw. And you, just for an example, see the foramen magnum move from a posterior position to an anterior position. In other words, we move from the back of the head in a quadrupedal to the bottom of the head in a bipedal. And that represents that as we became more and more bipedal, we separated ourselves into this separate species that's now unique. You look at the, not just of the pre-Australopithecines, which date, 2.6 million years ago? I can't remember I had the notes on this the other day. But you go from the pre-Australopithecines to the Australopithecines, and we have, dozens of different species of the Australopithecines that represent this exact transition between primates. And the problem is we can suggest and just say, well, those, it was easy to say initially, well, maybe they're wrong about these estimates, maybe these fossils are wrong. But we have tens of thousands of fossils. The weight of evidence is so obviously that we are connected through our different species because we see so much of the transition take place. Now, the other thing is, like, a lot of the questions about evolution, like, well, what about at the very beginning and the origins? Like, I'll agree. I don't think that science has a good explanation for that. I don't think anyone has a good explanation for it yet, scientifically, how that would happen. I don't think that means that we should reject science. For an extremely long time, we didn't know. There were a lot of scientific processes that we didn't have good information about. Like, we didn't know what happened. We didn't know exactly what the cell was made out of. We didn't really understand. Even Darwin didn't understand how human beings became bipedal. He suggested something called the hunting hypothesis, that we just started hunting more accurately, and that's why we became more like that. But now that we have a lot more researchers, like at least 6 or 7 major theories that are doing really well to discover why that's the case. So I definitely don't think we should just kind of throw out science on this one and say, well, science will never get it right. It has to be from some designer, when science has already made such incredible leaps and bounds to discover. But the other thing that I think this is to, like, for the people watching, one of the things I get really concerned about is I'll see people say, well, evolution can't possibly be true because there is a God, and that's that, they're welcome to have that belief. But the problem is that belief would intentionally discourage the discovery of these transition fossils that are really important. It would discourage, like, National Geographic going into Southern Africa and finding Homo naledi and discovering this. because we know that there are transitions between species and that we evolved, we're more excited to do research and do archaeology because the weight of the evidence that we're finding is swinging massively to evolution. So the main reason I believe in evolution is I find it extremely compelling that there is remarkable similarity between species, and that that we see so many fossils that represent transitions between species. It just doesn't seem very scientific to say, well, we must have just poofed into existence because a being that we cannot understand, define, comprehend, or even analyze must have done it instead. I just don't feel like that's. I feel like that's an inferior explanation, and it doesn't really rely on scientific evidence to make its point. But yeah, that's my opinion. Yeah.
Okay,
Continue.
so I like everything you said. And first I want to say, and I won't even call it a rebuttal. First, I'll say that it's important to understand that when you're talking about intelligent design, that it's not based off Christianity. Like there are some atheists that believe in intelligent design, just like there are some Christians that believe in intelligent design. Just like there are some Christians who believe intelligent design is BS. So I wanted to actually kind of define what intelligent design is. It's let me see if I find it. Okay. Intelligent design proponents contend that the information in life arose via purposeful, intelligently guided process. That both claims are scientifically testable using the standard methods of science. But ID theorists say that when we use the scientific method to explore nature, the evidence points away from unguided material causes and reveals intelligent design. Intelligent design is in the business of trying to discriminate between naturally caused objects and, on the other hand, and intelligently caused objects on the other. So, an example. So, you can go to Mount Rainier and you can say that the process, you can use science and say this process came to be. This is how the Mount Rainier came to be. It shows great complexity. Okay, just like the human bodies. But the thing that separates it is complexity and specification, meaning specification and or purpose and like that. So you go from one mountain and you say, okay, looking at this, it shows great complexity how this volcano came to be and stuff like that. And then you can go to Mount Rushmore and you go to Mount Rushmore and you have the same thing, only here there are faces carved into the side right there, which show specification. And by this you can see that there was a designer that came to it on top of that. And it's kind of the same thing when you look at the human body and just the way when you say evolution accurately explains our origins. Well, there's a lot of purpose that has to do with our origins too. And the mere fact that everything about the human body has a purpose to it. And it's kind of battles away the theory of just random occurrences, random things happening, and random this and random that if it has a purpose. And when you talk about that we have shared characteristics, an intelligent designer would say that shows a common designer, as in, like, if you look at cars, okay, so you say that us and primates and some of the other stuff, we have some of the same characteristics. Well, when you look at a car, okay, whether it be Mercedes Benz, whether it be Volkswagen, whether it be a Jetta, whether it be whatever kind of car, airplanes, boats, the steering wheel. The steering wheel is right there, and that shows that when a designer came up with something and it worked and it was purposeful and it had great purpose, that it repeated the same design along everything, and that kind of also shows that once again a designer and a lot of things you have to do with just how we hear. And you look at like I said, and I'm not trying to go off to everything else. I'm really not. So when you look at, okay, so oxygen is here and the trees go from oxygen. Then you have bees that cross pollinate this. Then you have the animals that eat this. Then you have us that eat the animals. The whole, I guess you could say, the circle of life and everything else, and the food pyramid or everything else. Everything is a purpose and everything builds off of each other. And it's kind of hard to say that evolved from nothingness. Like, say that once did not exist, but it exists now. And when you start looking at just going from single-cell organisms to multi-celled organisms, a lot of it is hey, it looks like you need some help over there.
got it. I got it.
Hey, a lot of it shows that there are certain things that when you have you ever heard of irreducible complexity?
Yeah, all the time. All the time.
Okay, so when you look at even some of the things that's irreducible complexity, it shows that okay, yes, the way things are now, you can't take away like parts of it. Even when you go to the human heart, or when you go to the human brain, or when you go to almost anything, lungs, kidneys, anything else, it has a lot to do with that. Shows that the human body needs all these things to be able to do that. Also, that is when you brought up missing links and the holes in evolution and kind of some of the stuff that's missing, these missing links and stuff like that. When you look at, okay, I couldn't find the article before we had this debate, but there was the fact that when Darwin came up with his theory of evolution, he only had knowledge of about 15% of the total amount of species that we had at the time. And so that left a good 85% of the species that wasn't there. And when you look at the amount of species we have, and you backtrack that and you say, okay, if let's go evolution, that we started from this and everything evolved and everything split and there's tree branch here and stuff like that, it would take way more. I think how many years are you one of the ones that say, are you like 4 billion years for the earth?
I think it's 4.3. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But with the amount of
universe is clocked at 4.3, but life on Earth, I think we put it. I'm going to quote myself: 1.2 billion. I can't remember exactly, but yeah.
Okay, but and I can't find the article, and I have to find this later. But it showed that with the amount of species that have been discovered, especially after Darwin, that it in trillions of years in order to be able to evolve and create all these different species. So it was easy for Darwin to say at the time, all the creatures evolved from this one thing, and this is where we came from, when he only was aware of 15% of the total species that was on Earth. So when you talk about irreducible complexity, the holes in the missing links and all this stuff, and the fact that the amount of species that we have on Earth and the amount of evolution, and the fact that everything has a purpose, and having purpose is something that comes from having a designer, that it's like I said, evolution. Okay, let me ask you this question. Talk me through, in your opinion, talk me through evolution from whatever you consider to be the beginning up until now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so let me ask you real quick before I continue. You said irreducible complexity. What do you mean by that? Can you define that for me?
Okay. Shoot, I wish I would have found the notes for that so I can give a better one. So to me, irreducible complexity. This is the definition according to Terrence. Basically, the way the human body is. If you were to try to reverse engineer the human body, you can only go back to a certain point, and after you hit that certain point, that you can't go back any further. So basically, if you try to work with evolution from this side over here, from single cell organism, and you start from where the human body is now, and you try to reverse engineer the human body, that you could not meet the beginning, which is a single celled organism or something like that. That at a certain point, you can't. There's no parts of the human brain that can be taken apart and still be able to function. You can't take parts away from the heart and say this. You can't reverse engineer the human body and meet to a single cell organism. Let me find a better.
Well, no. I understand what you're saying. So I'm really familiar with irreducible complexity. I just want to make sure that you were using it the way that I was familiar. Okay, so the first thing is the idea that we can't re-engineer the human body. I mean, that's correct. The claim of evolution is not that we re-engineer the entire human body, that we were just simply a current set of building blocks that we've been adding to for forever in the same environment. Now, the heart of all evolution and adaptation is climate and environment. Technically climate, because climate will affect what your environment looks like. But the claim of evolution, the claim of natural selection is that we adapt to our environment, and that bad adaptations don't proliferate and good adaptations typically do. That is to say that if someone has a genetic predisposition for X thing, and this is where genetics comes in, is like if the environment that they're in is selects for that. I mean, take for example, fish, like really deep under the sea. well, I mean, or really just any environment, like an ability to run better, to use four legs, an ability to see better. All of that stuff is going to get selected for. Take, for example, bats. Like a bat that is completely unable to see in its environment is going to pass on, and nature will select for that. Now, you talk about the chronology of evolution. I do take a huge issue with saying that mathematically there would just be more years required than have been. That there's more years. The truth is that evolution can occur at very different rates depending on the environment. Good example would be something like a founder's effect. So a founder's effect describes a scenario of gene flow, which is one of the four major influences evolution that describes how we breed. And it basically says that if a population gets separated from its original, like say a segment of 4 to 5 people get separated from the original population and they interbreed, the changes between those populations and the original will be massive. If you want to have a population that's really consistent and that doesn't really change that much, you want it to be massive, because any irregular, like say we have 100 people, an irregularity constitutes 1% of that group, and it's most likely to get weeded out. However, if you take 4 people, that irregularity is now worth 25% of the group, and breeding between the two is way more likely to produce those kinds of things. A good example would be something like incest. That's the reason that you see. It's true. Like evolution, like that's the explanation as to why you see so many deleterious effects, is because the typical predispositions for stuff like disease or problem, those are what's known as the recessive alleles, and they're more likely to be homozygous when you have an interbreeding population. So it's actually breeding with a diverse group of people in a large population is what eliminates those things. All that to say, you can see really quick evolution when you have fast environment change. Because, for example, let's say that there is a natural disaster that destroys. Let's say that there's a bunch of trees in a forest. We're some different animals. Some are taller than others, and a giant forest fire comes in and burns all the short trees. Well, that means that most of the short people are going to die out, and what's going to be left is a bunch of tall primates or tall animals that are left getting the food, meaning that the only people left to breed are going to be the tall ones, more likely to pass on their genetic information. That's just one such example. So evolution, I don't think, here's the problem, is that most criticisms of evolution are so theoretical and broad. They're very far removed from the science, and I have yet to see someone actually take an evolution course, someone actually study evolution deeply and then come back with the conclusion that it's false. Because much of these questions are really simple to answer. Like, what about like the time? Well, the truth is evolution can occur at rapidly different paces. And one quick thing on genetics, by the way, you said Darwin wasn't aware of genetics. And you also talked about Darwin wasn't aware of the number of species. The first thing is Darwin was aware of genetics. Gregor Mendel published he wasn't aware of the genetics we were, of course, but Gregor Mendel made his first publication about genetics, I believe it was like 1850. He started working in the 1840s and 50s, which is right around when Darwin worked. And that was actually what Darwin did. Darwin was taking the ideas of genetics, as well as one other, I can't remember his name, it escapes me. Full disclosure, I took a class on evolution for this semester at school. I just took the final 3 days ago. I just finished it. So that's one of the reasons that it's been on my mind. I can't remember the other guy. It was what we learned back in like week 4. But so he did publish based on genetics, and he was, granted, like Darwin could not have possibly been aware of the number of species we were, but his argumentation and his ideologies lay the groundwork for how those species evolved. There's not like a specific number of species that evolution couldn't account for. Now, irreducible complexity, this is what's important to mention. So the first thing is that we're not re-engineering the human body. There is probably a misunderstanding of evolution here. Evolution is not the claim that our body is just like a series of advantages and we just kind of tack it on towards the end. Evolution means that in the environment that we are, the adaptations that help us survive are the ones that are going to be passed on. So for example, take the issue of bipedalism, like why we walk on 2 legs. One of the most prominent theories is that it's called the patchy forest hypothesis. And granted, there's like several out there that are reasonable. But the way this argument works is, right around at the end of the Miocene, which is an epoch, I think about like 20 something, 10, I can't remember the number of millions of years ago. It's a while back. The temperatures peaked a lot, and so you saw a decline in stuff like forests and an increase in stuff like grasslands. As a result, people needed to walk on 2 legs to be able to hunt for food, to be able to see, because they're not using their arms for locomotion in the trees anymore. They're not arboreal. They're in the grasslands. And it's going to be a lot more efficient to walk and to hunt when you're free to use your hands. So that illustration is saying that in the environment they were, like, for example, the tall grasslands, it was going to be better for them to use their hands. It's not the idea that just purely random mathematical calculations just poof gave us a bunch of these advantages. It's to say we existed in certain environments that made these traits better. And I think one of the best evidences for this is look at all of the species currently living in their environments. Notice how they all have traits that help them survive and adapt to their environment. Fish very deep under the water will be able to withstand pressure. They'll be able to, some of them will have rudimentary senses of sight. But here's a good illustration. Like, there's no selective advantage for them to have the sight that we do. So they don't have it. Like, they don't need it to survive. So they're not going to develop that trait and pass on. Whereas with us, there's a huge advantage to be able to seeing things like color. For example, we want to tell like which berries are poisonous and which aren't. Huge ability for us to have proper depth perception. That's why we have such good eyes, is that all of that stuff helps us survive better. And thus, in the billions of years that it's taken for us to develop, those traits are going to be advantageous. Last thing is on the theoretical argument of irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity is a farce of an argument, and not to be aggressive here, but like no serious scientist actually uses this. I'm serious. So for one, the irreducible complexity is seen in nature all of the time. Go hiking, look at a stone bridge. If you remove one of those stones, yes, the entire thing will collapse. That is definitionally irreducibly complex because any one component of that would destroy the entire system. But nature does that all of the time. The second thing is that we've had billions of years to work with, not like 4 minutes. But the third thing is that we've already actually observed irreducible complexity in cellular organisms. Researchers at the Santa Fe Institute did this on a molecular level, where they tested randomized combinations of molecules and were able to see. I'll probably pull up the study and send it to you later because I'm not quoting it like as efficiently as I want to, but they were absolutely able to see complexity in nature. And again, if the argument is we need a God, we need a supernatural, non-scientifically explainable entity to do this, the answer to that is no, because we've seen it in nature plenty, and the mechanisms are in place for it to be produced.
Okay, so like the loudest dog you heard barking is this little bitty dog right here, which is the craziest thing, that this little bitty dog is the terror. Be quiet. Okay, so all right, in talking about this, so I have a few things I want to cover. So Darwinian evolution, it kind of relies on random mutations that are selected by a blind, kind of unguided process, and it has no goals. It just kind of happens. Well, the thing is that a random and undirected process tends to harm organism and does not improve them or build complexity. And I have I'm not trying to go study heavy because you didn't go study heavy, so I won't try to do that. But
please, I want to see them if they. Just go for it.
According to the National Academy of Sciences, new mutations do not create new species; they create offspring that are impaired. Past president of the French Academy of Science says that mutations have a very limited constructive capacity because no matter how numerous they may be, mutations do not produce any kind of evolution. And so it's like I said, it's not so much because most people, you'll see, like if you talk about microevolution as far as evolution within a species and mutations and stuff like that, like humans starting here and then humans to where we are now. Nobody, I don't think, I could be wrong, and I don't think anybody really disagrees with that, to my knowledge, right now.
Just a quick note. The Texas State Board of Education disagrees with that. It's a we watched it in class and we were crying laughing. Well, just a quick, I'll let you continue. But my professor is licensed to teach graduate medical students human anatomy. She's not licensed to teach high schools because the State Board of Education is so anti-science and anti-education. Yeah, they don't even believe micro. But you're right. Most people, even in the non-macro evolution, are going to believe in micro. Continue.
Yes, and the biggest. So I asked you this earlier, and I guess we should have started out with this, but you kicked it to me first. which is when you say when the resolution is evolution accurately explains our origins. I guess I should have actually asked you to explain our origins and how evolution explains that, because like I said, the thing that evolution to me, the thing that evolution misses that can't be explained is the the macro evolution, the interspecies stuff. And okay, so in talking about paleontology, the fossil record lacks intermediate fossils. The fossil record's overall pattern is one of abrupt explosions of new biological forms, and possible candidates for evolutionary transitions are the exception, not the rule. This has been recognized by many evolutionary biologists, such as Ernest Mayr, who explained in 2000 that new species usually appear in the fossil record suddenly, not connected with their ancestors by a series of intermediates. Similarly, a zoology textbook observed that many species remain virtually unchanged for millions of years, then suddenly to be replaced by a quite different but related form. Moreover, most major groups of animals appear abruptly in the fossil record, fully formed with no fossils yet discovered that form a transition from their parent group. So, I say all to say this. I think the biggest holes in evolution are the starting from, I guess, and I hate to keep bringing this up because I know this has pretty much been disproven, which is Darwin and his nice little tree of how everything came. The tree itself and how you go, that is the biggest problem. That when you say evolution accurately explains our origins, it doesn't accurately explains it. Evolution explains it the best way it can, but that way still has multiple upon multiple holes in it. Another one. So biologists hope that DNA evidence. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't want to keep reading articles.
Yo, Terrence.
Yep.
Let's start our discussion a little bit, just so that we can, because I don't want to give like really big overarching responses and move past you because we'll be missing some stuff. First thing, when was that article published that said we don't see intermediate fossils in the fossil record? What's the date on that?
2000. That's all I have. I'll have to. We can go. I got that one in 2000.
Yeah. So that's I mean, that's a little surprising to see from who published it, you said? Who published it?
See, now I already flipped like 3 slides. Hey, you keep talking and I'll find that. I don't want to we have 7 minutes left, and I don't want to kill the time. Why?
Yeah. So okay, I'm very unconvinced that article. That article is not convincing. For one, it is a fact we have found tens of thousands of intermediate fossils. Just look between humans and primates. We've seen pre-Australopithecines. And again, I'll drop you some names. One such would be Sahelanthropus chidensis, which is Sahelanthropus space TCHADENSIS, which was around 7 to 6 million years ago. Let's see. We also could talk about the Australopithecines. I mean, there are tens of thousands of examples. I mean, no scientist is. I mean, to be honest, if we found some completely damning argument to evolution, I mean, you'd be winning the Nobel Prize.
Okay.
I mean,
but the thing is, like I said, the thing that's missing, and I'm not going to cede it to you, but I'm trying to find a way to word this right. So let's say, I can't say it like that either. Okay, so you say that there are all kind of fossils that kind of say it links primates to humans. Okay.
Yes.
That's the point you're trying to make. Well, to me, that only, and I'm trying to word this right, but I can't get it right. But I'll just say it. To me, that still doesn't really explain as much as the burden of proof that evolution is trying to prove. You know what I'm saying is evolution says that all species came from one, and so you say that maybe you find a fossil that could link primates to humans. Well, that's not even 1% of what evolution claims, because evolution claims that all species originated from the same. So you'd have to find just as much fossil evidence that links like bats to dogs and dogs to rhinoceroses. Is rhinoceroses? I don't even know. Maybe I should have picked a different animal, but stuff like that.
Well, yeah. Let me start with there real quick. So, this idea that evolution will only be proven at the moment we have seen explicit fossil record evidence for 100% of fossils is silly.
But
First,
hold on. But before you go, but I just want to say this. But the funny thing is, and I'm not trying to go on religion. The funny thing is that is the burden of proof that people put on religion, that they need 100% evidence proof on everything. Okay, I just had that was my little side rant. But okay, go back to what you were saying now.
sure. I think here's the problem: is when you're competing against a scientific theory that has enormous evidence. I'm not going to say 100%. It depends on the exact claim you're making. There's no such thing as a burden of proof that's the same for every claim. That's. But yeah. The problem is if you're working up against basically the scientific consensus of the past 100+ years. It's astronomical. The discovery that evolution is a total farce and there's some better, superior scientific explanation would not only completely re-engineer the way science is done and will be done for the rest of time. I mean, you would be winning the Nobel Prize. You would be in every headline ever. The only way, like the way people actually approach it, they don't really take it to its logical conclusion. But to insist that evolution is false, and not just like I'm confused about it, I don't know, I have some questions. That's one thing. But to insist that it's actually false is to insist that there is a conspiracy created by people who have, I mean, thousands of scientists who have dedicated their entire lives to this study are lying to us, are trying to trick us. Like when you understand that people have actually spent literal decades of their life doing this research and doing this study, and to say that everything they've seen is actually total BS and not real, I find that silly. But to answer what you're saying about the fossil record, first thing I want to say is the lack of fossil record evidence is not actually an argument against evolution. I'm not trying to say that lacking evidence is a reason to believe. That's not what I'm saying. But we already know that the fossil record has innate limitations. The three most common are that fossils are not everywhere. We have not looked everywhere. And sometimes even in an area, the fossil record will not be complete because of different natural reasons. The only way that stuff gets fossilized is if it's put in an oxygen-free environment for an extremely long period of time and is isolated. So it's not at all, it's not unreasonable to say that the reason we haven't seen these fossils is because they never got locked into sediment. The vast majority of all life never gets locked into sediment. Fossils are incredible. They're a gift. Like, we should be excited to see them, but not look at them as in, well, at the moment we don't see this fossil here, evolution has to be false. Now, I know that sounds generic to say, because I'm saying, like, it sounds like I'm trying to say, well, we don't need evidence. But the fact is, like, we're ignoring the fact that we already do. We do already have the intermediate fossils of thousands of different species that are available to us right now. There's no creationist explanation for the Australopithecines. Like literally, some creationists will literally stand up and say that all of these fossils were either made up or are not, like, we're somehow observing them incorrectly. They're just some twisted monkey skull that we're, but like, these are so unscientific. I am an undergraduate student and I'm not even majoring in anthropology. I was able to look at this skull for 3 seconds and know that it was not a monkey, because another good example is like how the femur is angled. The femur in bipedals is always going to be angled inward because we have to support our gait as we walk, whereas in primates it's not. So here, just to summarize real quick, and I want to give you a little bit of time too at the end. There are 4 main causes of evolution. Mutation is one of them. The other 3 are gene flow, genetic drift, and natural selection. Genetic drift relates to, for example, the founder's effect, where populations can get isolated and can spur different effects as a result of the alleles that exist within a population. So you can see quick genetic change. You can also gene flow is the transfer of genetic information between populations. So interbreeding causes quick genetic change, and natural selection too. You said before, like, randomizations don't produce intelligence, but when nature is not random. Nature is selecting for survival. The reason you are alive right now, Terrence, is not a roll of the die. It's because you ate food this morning. It's because you did stuff that would promote your survival. And that non-random nature aspect of nature is what selects for our different traits. But yeah, go ahead. Hey, I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Terrence. I got nothing. Yeah, you're totally muted, dude. Hey, we'll continue this discussion. Shoot me a Facebook message. We'll continue. I enjoyed our conversation. I thought it was civil and great. And I think you're a great